The search continues this morning in Texas as officials say more than 170 people now are still missing in last week's deadly flooding. Teams fanning out by air, water, land, even on horseback in the aftermath of a disaster that has killed at least 120 people across 6 counties. 5 campers and 1 counselor remain missing from Camp Mystic, where more heartbreaking stories of loss are coming to light with each passing day. Like 8-year-old camper Mary Kate Jacoby, her family says, quote, she entered the gates of heaven, adding she was tiny but mighty and full of love. Today, questions continue about whether more could have been done to warn residents ahead of the catastrophic floods. At a press conference yesterday, local officials defended their response and said those questions will be answered in time.
I believe those questions need to be answered to the family of the missed loved ones, to the public. We're not running. We're not going to hide from everything. That's going to be checked into at a later time. I wish I could tell you that time.
Folks, I don't know how many lives our KPD team saved in an hour in Kerrville, but I know that this tragedy, as horrific as it is, could have been so much worse.
That response comes as new reporting from NBC News reveals the former Kerr County commissioner described the county's flood warning system as antiquated back in 2016, and that Kerr County officials discussed warning systems more than 24 times since then. Joining us now from Kerrville, Texas, is NBC News national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. Aaron, good morning. What's the latest there?
Hey, Willie, good morning. The search effort really is going to continue today in the way that it has over the last week. It was an effort that started in the immediate hours after the flooding last Friday morning. And since then, we understand that there have been about 2,100 first responders on the ground across this region, primarily here in Kerr County, but in other counties that have been impacted by the flooding here as well. That includes teams from obviously across the state of Texas that have been operating in the air, in the water, and so many of them on foot, along with volunteers, along with search and rescue teams that have been brought in from other states. We know cadaver dogs are being brought into the area from other states as well to help in this search effort. And we heard officials say yesterday that they're now in a sort of a deep impact phase of the search effort here. Where so much of the water has receded and these teams are able to get underneath a lot of the debris that had been pushed downriver through the course of the flooding. And that's going to allow them to be able to find, they hope, more of the missing people. At this point, as you noted, there's a death toll of about 120, and there's still more than 170 people who are missing, the known missing, as has been described to us. And the majority of those people are here in Kerr County as well. You talk about the accountability piece of this. We know that the sheriff has been pressed over the last couple of days about when emergency officials were aware of the level of flooding that was expected to come down the Guadalupe River and when they started alerting the citizens, when they started trying to get people away from the Guadalupe River. And he wasn't really able to give a detailed response to that question. It's something that he's been pressed on. And yesterday in the briefing they held, he said that the incident will be reviewed, saying that there would be an after-action report produced, but at a later time. He said the focus really of his entire law enforcement enterprise here is the focus is really on trying to execute the recovery here, trying to find as many of the missing people as possible and to try to get this community back up on its feet. So many people who did survive the flooding have had their lives really just devastated by what happened here. At the same time, you noted there is a special session of the state legislature later on this month that was already on the books, and now this flooding incident is going to be at the top of the agenda. Governor Greg Abbott released his agenda for that special session late yesterday, and the flooding incident in terms of both looking at legislation for better improvements to the alert systems here and the infrastructure around flooding, as well as relief funding for this region. Those are all going to be a part of that special session, guys.
Aaron, we're hearing harrowing stories coming out of Camp Mystic. Sadly, funerals now being planned for little girls in Dallas, Houston, and other parts across Texas. As I mentioned, 5 campers and a counselor still unaccounted for from Camp Mystic. New reporting this morning that even during expansion of the camp a few years back, it remained in an extremely hazardous flood zone that probably needed more warnings than it got, and a more sophisticated warning system. What else are we hearing out of Camp Mystic about the girls who died, the counselor who died, and the director of the camp who passed away as well.
Well, Willie, I got to tell you, I was able to drive up the river to Camp Mystic yesterday along with our team, and it was an incredible sight to see what happened in that community of Hunt, Texas. We were told that when the floodwaters rose, Hunt essentially became an island, or a series of islands even, and people, by the accounting of 2 police officers who happened to live in that area, they were not able to get out. They were not able to get into people. They saw some folks. They were able to yell to them to try to get to the rooftops and to get to safe areas. As they were able to access people, they were trying to triage those who had been injured. And when you look at Camp Mystic, you can see some of the pictures that we saw here yesterday. I mean, the river is right there, just a few yards away from one of the living quarters, the cabins there. And you have to imagine how incredibly frightening this was for the young ladies who were at this camp as they saw that river raging, ripping trees out of the ground, pushing homes off foundations nearby. It was just an incredible sight to see there. We know that 165 young ladies were rescued. The campers and staff there were rescued. 27 were initially listed as missing. That number is now down to 6. We also know that there was a disaster plan that the camp was required to put together. That's a requirement by the state. That plan had been submitted to the state and approved just 2 days before this flooding incident. That plan did include an evacuation plan, an understanding of who at the camp was supposed to execute what responsibilities during a major incident. There are still questions, obviously, about to what degree they were able to operationalize that particular plan, with it only having been approved 2 days in advance. But there would have been previous plans. We assume that we still need to ask questions about whether the staff there were trained on what to do. But it is worth noting, Willie, that, again, 165 lives were saved by helicopters coming in and helping to get people out of Camp Mystic.
NBC's Aaron Gilchrist reporting from Kerrville, Texas. Aaron, thank you for your reporting. We appreciate it. Joe?
You know, Willie, the flood system, as you reported, was considered antiquated a decade ago. You had not only the people of Kerrville, you had to have people in the county and people in the state repeatedly ignore these very clear signals that people's lives were in danger. Texans' lives were in danger because they weren't upgrading an antiquated system. We heard a sheriff say in a clip that things could have been so much worse, and certainly they could have, and we salute the first responders. But also, there is no doubt, if the warnings over the past decade had been listened to by politicians in Texas on the local and the state level, then this tragedy could have been so less worse, so less tragic. And I'm reminded of Hurricane Katrina, how for a decade you had city officials in New Orleans, you had state officials in Louisiana ignore warning after warning after warning about an old, antiquated levee system that was not able to hold back the floodwaters. So it seems to me, Willie, that's the same thing that's happening here. They knew there was a problem, and there's really no passing of the buck, because I'll tell you how things happen. When I represented 6 counties in Northwest Florida, if there was a problem that people had in, a hurricane coming, then, and somebody saw a problem, somebody would talk to a county commissioner. County commissioner would talk to me. I would get funding for whatever needed to be taken care of, and it would be taken care of. I find it hard to believe 2 things right here. One, again, complaints about an antiquated warning system went unheeded for a decade. That's number one. Number 2, that the local authorities, that the county authorities, that the state authorities allowed a children's camp to be built in a flood zone just a few years ago in a highly dangerous flood zone. You, of course, talking about the reporting that's on the front page of the New York Times today, Willie. So that's again, one more thing where the state of Texas failed miserably. I find it hard to believe that would happen in the state of Florida. Post Andrew, leaders took every precaution to make sure that building standards were raised. But again, how they knew this was a problem for a decade and still allowed Camp Mystic to expand in an active flood zone is beyond me.
Yeah, to expand or at least not have a new updated warning system as they expanded as part of getting the permit or part of that expansion. There are camps nearby in this same flood zone, Joe, and New York Times has some great reporting on this morning where just by word of mouth, there was a nearby camp where a staffer was up at 1 o'clock in the morning and heard the alert on his phone, and he started waking people up and telling them, move them to higher ground, and everyone in that camp survived. The point is, though, you shouldn't be relying on somebody happening to be awake at 1 o'clock in the morning and seeing something on his phone to run around to cabins and get everybody to higher ground. That's what happened, and so tragically and so devastatingly did not happen at Camp Mystic. There's got to be a better way. And Joe, oddly, the other day, Governor Abbott of Texas, very defensive and bristling at reporters, saying this is the talk of losers to ask these kind of questions in a moment like this while we're still looking for children. No, it's the talk of accountability and making sure this never happens again and asking questions about how this was possible, how we got here, and preventing, again, this from ever happening again to a group of little girls fighting for their lives in the middle of the night during a flood.
Yeah, I mean, the talk of losers is somebody is somebody who doesn't take responsibility. Doesn't take responsibility when something happened in his state where people died. There's an antiquated system in an active flood zone that everybody knows is a dangerous flood zone. And in his state, nothing is done for over a decade to an antiquated warning system. And his state allows the building, the expansion of a camp in a flood zone instead of saying, sorry, you can't build in an extraordinarily dangerous flood zone. You're going to have to actually move to higher ground. That's what responsible states do. That's what responsible leaders do. And the governor, suggesting that any calls for accountability is a talk of losers, actually suggests that the losers talk is that person who's afraid to face the accountability he deserves.
Makes me feel like asking more questions.
Well, there will be more questions asked, and it doesn't matter if losers don't want to face accountability, too bad.